You are listening to the Willpower Podcast. Welcome to the show. I am Will Holdren, and I talk with some of the most influential CEOs, entrepreneurial leaders, and thought leaders to reveal the secrets that have led to their success. I believe that with the right knowledge and mindset, you can do anything you say your mind to. So if you want to learn how to change your life for the better, if you want to learn how millionaires actually became wealthy, or if you want to develop and start your own business from the ground up with the right knowledge to help you, then you are in the right place because this is the Willpower Podcast. How are we doing, everyone? My name is Will Holdren. I am the host of the Willpower Podcast. Today we have an incredible entrepreneur, and his name is Steve Mann. And Steve, like I mentioned, he is a serial entrepreneur. He has launched many businesses throughout his life. He is also a humanitarian, and he is passionate and really an advocate for leadership for young adults and people growing up, which is an incredible thing that we definitely need more of in today's world. On top of that, he has a book coming out soon, and the book is called Stories That Shape Us. It's all about leadership and how to become the best person you can be throughout your life. So I'm looking forward to that book coming out. And with that being said, Steve, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure. For those listening, Jeff Mann, we had him on our podcast not too long ago as well. He's the one that made this introduction. And I'm super pumped to hear more about your story and everything you've been through. I'm sure it'll definitely resonate with my audience as well. But starting out, I want to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests, which is one,
Okay.
what makes you take time out of your busy day to hop on podcasts like these to just share your story?
Well, as you mentioned, I have spent the bulk of my life in either leadership or humanitarian efforts. And just I'm a firm believer that we all want to make a contribution, particularly to grandchildren, great-grandchildren, the next generation. But often we don't know how. And so I'm having a fun time both writing the book and discussing with people how they can help influence children, grandchildren, the next generation.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So when I get a chance to do that, I do it.
Right. Spread the message. And I love the idea of the book. I mean, you've obviously have so much history and so much background. You can obviously pour into that book and will help a lot of people. I'm curious, what kind of who inspired you to write the book? Was it just you out of the blue saying, you know what, now's the time? We're going to go out there and write a book, or was someone telling you, you got to write a book? And how did that come about?
Well, it kind of grew gradually. Probably the first time I even thought about it was when Jeff and his brother Hunter were about 10. We were packing to move to Africa. And they were unpacking some things, and they came across some pictures of me with President Reagan and with President Ford. And they hold them up and say, "Dad, what's this? Is this photoshopped? What is this going on?" And I realized we had never talked about it. They had no idea of things that I had done with the White House. Life gets busy and you forget old stuff. And in fact, I realized they really knew little about my life at all. Later, many years later, I was talking with a grandson, Benjamin. He's just down the stairs here.
Nice.
And talking to them about how Jeff and Hunter, who are Black, were sometimes followed home by the police because of their skin color. And Benjamin, at 7 years old, says, "Well, that's dumb. Why would they do that?" And now that a discussion of racism and trying to help a 7-year-old understand that is pretty difficult. But I realized that even little kids want to know more, but we don't talk to them. We talk about games, we talk about weather, we talk about their school, but we don't generally talk about traits and values and principles that are important to us. And so having those experiences, I started thinking, well, maybe I could write down a few of my stories, or maybe I could then just not have the stories, but turn it into how can other people talk to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren about things that are important to them.
Yeah. To that point, I think a lot of parents and grandparents, they struggle to have those really in-depth, meaningful conversations that you're talking about. Like you said, a lot of times the
Yeah,
conversation, surface level conversations, which are good, but it really doesn't go deep enough to really, transpire those values that you want to pass down and that knowledge that you want to pass down, which is also
yeah.
so crucial. And I love your whole mission. I think leadership is such an important concept, especially in today's world. I mean, I think with technology and everything going online, people are really losing a sense of how to become a great leader. And no matter what you do in life, you have to learn those leadership skills to become a better person, to lead others, and to really get where you want to go. So I'm kind of curious. I mean, from your point, um, what are some ways that people can become better leaders, young adults? How can they start to kind of transition into that leadership role and just develop into a leader that the world needs them to be?
Well, I think they need to open themselves up a little bit. We've almost relegated, as you mentioned, training on anything to social media or the internet. And that's not a human interaction. And the world runs with human interactions. And the more that they can get off the computer or their phone and find a way to talk to people one on one, the easier time they're going to have as they go about business or go about anything else, because you do have those human interactions. Now, the interactions you have on social media are great, but they're not the same. And we haven't converted ourselves entirely over to just being data-driven robots. We still have emotions, we still have feelings, we still have goals and objectives. And to be a good leader, you have to learn to understand that people have all those things. One story I tell in the book is I was a young missionary, about 19, in Germany. And this is in Frankfurt. And we were up on a Saturday at the Kaufhaus, which is a big department store. And I was looking out the window about the third floor, and the whole Frankfurter Platz was filled with, tens of thousands of people out doing their shopping. And I looked at those and thought, how is it possible that each one of those little dots down there has hopes and dreams and beliefs and struggles and things that they want to do and things that they feel strongly about, just like I do.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to look at each of those little dots and imagine that. And yet that's what our world is made up of. It's
Right.
not just numbers out there. It's people with emotions and dreams and things they want to do and foibles, problems that they have they're trying to work through.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a leader, you have to be able to understand what drives human beings.
Right. That is such a great point, and that is a constant theme that we have here on a podcast. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of entrepreneurs, and one of the main concepts we always talk about is building relationships, right? And how you can develop not just a network and connections, but really meaningful connections and meaningful relationships. And to your point, a lot of times it's how can you help that person? If you help enough people get what they want, the old saying is you're going to get what you want down the road. And so that's essentially what
Yeah.
you're talking about. Just understand what their goals are, see what their
Yeah.
concerns, see how you can help them to get from point A to point B. And you'll be surprised about how that small difference can really just change your life and change the world one person at a time. So,
You're right. I think sometimes we think of service as well. That's just some do-gooder stuff, but it's not. It's how we one find joy ourselves, and it's also how we build those relationships. And as we do that, we learn more about people. Because what business or organization isn't built on people? What business or organization isn't built on trying to provide some kind of a service? All of them. And they're built to do that. And the more we can understand that on the individual level,
yeah.
the better we can be at it.
Yeah. And so in your story, obviously you've started a lot of companies. You've been in and out as an entrepreneur, which is tremendous. And I'm sure you've had managers on your companies. You've had to hire people and train people. And so for a lot of people listening, they also have companies they're trying to grow and trying to get better. And a lot of times they're trying to bring people onto their team that can fill in a leadership role and take over that one of the management positions. So I'm kind of curious from your point of view. I mean, what aspects or characteristics of a person are you looking at when considering them to kind of fulfill that leadership role, where you can kind of mold them from their starting point to get to where they want to
Yeah. Well, back years ago, some nearly 50 years ago now, I had a management consulting firm in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we were kind of transitioning from doing mostly consulting to selling leadership training programs that we had created. And so I took over the building of the domestic sales force and then the international sales force. And one of my guidelines, because I then had subordinates who were hiring people, was don't hire anybody you wouldn't feel comfortable bringing home
Hmm.
to dinner. You know, if you don't like them, if they aren't somebody you would like to spend time with, you're going to have a hard time working together.
Yeah.
And now that's not always true. Sometimes you have some technical things that you need to hire for, or some kinds of information or experience that you need. But if it's not somebody you're comfortable with, it's going to be harder. Now, the same side of that is, what do you need to do to be comfortable with a wider range of people? And many of us are not. I have had I grew up on a small farm in Idaho, uh, totally white. Everybody around was. And, but I've had the opportunity to be in about 50 countries and work in humanitarian things. I've spent some 7 years living in Africa. And you learn pretty quickly that people are people. It doesn't matter what religion they are, what color they are, what ethnicity they are, what language they speak. If you can get close to them and do something with them, they're people. They have the same kinds of hopes and dreams and concerns as anybody else does. And they may have far more experience and far more ability than anybody you know firsthand. And if you write all those people off, you just wrote off, 90% of the potential experience that you could gain.
Yeah.
So I remember once down at a leadership program for training entrepreneurs in Mexico City. And Americans have a tendency, I think, to look and say, oh, Mexicans, what do they know? What could they do? I'm watching these kids,
Yeah.
young adults, come through these leadership kind of programs. I'm sitting there thinking, America better watch out, because we can't sit there and be smug about, oh, we control the world, because this group of Mexican kids have all the energy and the brilliance and the education and the drive to take over the world, just like kids do anywhere. And so I am a big believer in, we have to open our own eyes to people who are different than us if we want to have the best talent, the best experiences.
I 100% agree. And I think one of the issues nowadays is that most people don't get those experiences where they go overseas and see what other people are doing, like experience different cultures and just travel the world, kind of what you were talking about in your humanitarian work. So that whole concept is just like missing for them to kind of correlate, like what's the difference, what's going on over there compared.
Yeah. And
And
it's hard. It's hard when you don't have the exposure to get that experience, but
yeah,
boy, it's critical, I think.
yeah, I love that. And one of the other concepts that we talk about a lot on this podcast is really Christian entrepreneurship, right? And just growing in faith and growing the company. And what I love about your story is not only are you a very successful entrepreneur, but you've also took that leap to go into humanitarian work. And it could have been a lot easier probably to stay in the US, not do anything overseas, and just live a comfortable life. But you took that initiative to really, go overseas, help other people, and venture into that space. So I'm kind of just want to touch on that for a second. I mean, what made you want to get started in humanitarian work to begin with?
um, it started when I was just a boy. I was blind pretty much, and I could read, but I couldn't. I was nearsighted, so I couldn't see. I didn't know there were mountains where I lived. I couldn't play ball because I couldn't see the ball until it hit me. And so I did lots and lots of reading. And that started opening me up to the world. I remember reading about Dr. Schweitzer and setting up a medical clinic in Africa, and somehow that stuck with me.
Mm.
And later on, as I started building international operations, I I would kind of look out for what's going on, what are the needs, what's happening. And so when I was able to, I just started traveling with people doing humanitarian work. And just kind of an interesting story. I came home one day from a trip. I think I'd been in Africa, and we were supposed to go to a meeting of our church, and I didn't know what it was, but it was meeting for with our wives, and turned out it was an advertisement to go on missions.
Mm.
And I turned to my wife and said, "Hey, we can't do that with 6 dependent children, but who cares? Want to go to Africa and see if we can make a difference with AIDS?" She said, "Let's go." And literally 5 months later, we were living in Zimbabwe with
Wow.
6 kids, trying to figure out what to do and how to do it.
Yeah.
And I was traveling all over, trying to see what was going on with AIDS. And at that time, Zimbabwe, about roughly 38% of all adults were HIV positive. That meant they were dead within 5 years because there were no treatments or cures.
Mm.
And so I started creating programs for youth, high school age, and for companies on how can you learn how to prevent AIDS, how to not get infected by the virus. But, it was just a matter, I think, of interest, of being willing to take the risk, of having a spouse who was willing to do anything. And off we went. Later, we'd come home and people say, "Well, how did you think through your schooling or healthcare?" We didn't. We just went, figured we'll work it out when we get there.
Right.
And we did.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's definitely something beautiful just about just being able to take the jump. And I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially nowadays. They want to have everything figured out A to Z before they jump into something. And here you are talking about, you know what? We got 6 dependents. We know step A and B, but that's all we need to know for now. We're going to go to Zimbabwe. We're going to help a lot of people. And that to me is just, it's inspiring. So,
Back when I was a consultant, often we would work with want to be entrepreneurs. They were inventors who had invented something. And the biggest trouble most of them had was letting go, not waiting until everything was perfect because it never got perfect. And by the time they got to what they thought was perfect, somebody else had created it and gone a different direction. They weren't willing to just say, "Okay, let's go with what we've got." Tom Peters, who I don't know if you know Tom, but he wrote a long time ago the best-selling managed book ever called In Search of Excellence. And one of the things he used to like to say was, instead of ready, aim, fire, which is most what we do, it's ready, fire, aim. Get it out there, then figure out how to adjust it. Get it out there and figure out how to adjust it.
yep.
You see Elon Musk doing that a little bit with his rockets. Yeah, we're going to blow this thing up and learn from it.
Yeah.
And he now and their rocket company is way ahead of everybody else
Yeah.
because they blew things up.
Yep.
They were willing to take the risk. And I think it's hard. You're young and you have a family, and it's hard to kind of leave that nest that you have, the security that you have.
Yeah.
But I think if you want to do something significant, you have to take risk.
Yeah. No doubt. That's such a great point there. And you mentioned earlier that you actually spoke with Reagan at the White House, and so I'm kind of curious how your humanitarian work kind of led up to that moment in the White House. Are those two correlated, or how did
Well,
that?
now actually, the White House was before I got into humanitarian.
Okay,
Um, I
gotcha.
had a friend from school who ended up working in the White House. And when Ford was running for president, he invited me to come spend the summer, from summer on through the election, working for the Ford administration doing advanced work. And
Hmm.
I had just started my dream job as an organization consultant in a semiconductor company in California.
Yeah.
But I was going to go. There's no way I was going to turn that down. So I asked my boss, told him what I wanted to do. He says, "Oh, he says, I'm sure we can handle that. Let me get you a leave of absence." So I was thrilled with that, headed off to the White House and spent the next 6, 8 months traveling the country, kind of setting up things before the president would show up and setting up and setting up. And, I guess what that gave me was a little experience on how to meet with other people. We lost the election. And by the end of that 6 months, I'd lost about 25 pounds because there was no time to eat
Oh my God.
or even get your clothes washed. You were just running from town to city.
Yeah.
And then later, when Reagan was president, they asked me to come back and do a trip to Germany with him. So I was fortunate to be there when Reagan stepped across the checkpoint Charlie and looked at the German guards and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall."
Wow, you were there for that?
And I guess it's a little experiences like that. You start thinking of yourself not just as a little farm boy, but I'm part of the country and I'm part of a world.
Yeah.
And the people all over that world are really just the same. And so if you can make a difference, doesn't matter whether it's in Zimbabwe or it's in Poland or it's in China, go where you can make a difference.
Yeah. And then, like you said in your story, it leads to the biggest stage, making a difference on the biggest stage. So that had to be an incredible experience being there when you said tear down that wall. I mean, that's
Oh, it was. The Secret Service was kind of nervous because he stepped across Checkpoint Charlie,
right.
and he just smiled and looked up at the guards with their, machine guns. They didn't know what to do,
Right.
and what am I going to do? Kill the president?
Right.
And it turned out great and a great soundbite.
Yeah, definitely. Now,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
yep. Now that's a legacy. That's a quote and going down in history. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it was great to be there.
Yeah, that is very cool. I mean, you've seen a lot of, different presidents over the years and a lot of different administrations and kind of how America has changed over the years. So I kind of want to touch on that topic for a little bit. I mean, from your vantage point, with kind of how America has shifted to kind of where we are today with everything going on, I mean, are you concerned for like the younger generation growing up and like what's kind of do you have any concerns about, the path that America's on, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do, but if you read much American history, we have always been a contentious society. We have always been at odds. We are always stretching everything. We are the first, for whether it's a sexual revolution or it's a new invention. We're out there first, and we make mistakes. And it used to kind of tickle me a little bit when they were having the Black Lives Matter demonstrations, and people go, "Oh, the world's falling apart." Yeah. I'm thinking, where were you in the 60s when we were burning down cities and universities? Right. This is nothing. So on one hand, the country's always been that way, but I have a firm belief that we'll figure it out. We may cause a lot of problem, but eventually we'll figure it out because we are a democracy and we do make mistakes. But, I look at the younger generation with all the hope that you could have that they're going to right our mistakes and find ways to move forward. Now, at the same point, I'm concerned about democracy. I'm concerned about equality. I'm concerned about inclusion. I'm concerned about the government, that we don't lose the differences between the Congress and the executive and the judicial, that we find ways to honor those. So those are concerns of mine. Yeah. But I also believe that we'll find ways to work it through.
No doubt. No doubt. And that's also a very good point you brought up about, how in the 60s there still were riots going on and all these things. I think the difference to me is just social media and how much they, put a gas on the fire, and now everyone sees everything going on social media, and there's no like everything is just being seen.
Yeah. Well, and you're absolutely right about that. I think that the social media and the algorithms we have on the net, they move us to the extremes. Mm-hmm. And, it's been brand new. We didn't know that was happening. We're learning now that that's been happening.
Yeah.
But even as social media, I think, is like any other new invention. We get it and we don't know how to use it. So we throw it out there and we make lots of mistakes. Just like, nuclear energy. I mean, it creates energy all over the world. It also can blow us to pieces. And I think the social media we are making tons of mistakes. We don't know how to teach our children how to use it. We don't know how to use it, but we will learn. I'm convinced that over time we will learn, maybe at a huge cost, but we'll work it through.
Yeah. In due time, right? In due
I'm
time.
an eternal optimist. So,
Yeah. I love that though. You gotta be, abundance mindset, you gotta think positively, but yeah, in due time, I think we'll figure it out, you know.
a quick story. I was in Singapore once for some business meetings, and I'm going to dinner with a guy I was trying to recruit. And I show up for this restaurant, and two things about this. One, he ordered drunken prawns. I'll come back to that. I didn't know what that was. But I get there, and he's got a New York Times in front of him, and he's got tears in his eyes. I said, what's wrong? What's happening? He says, look at the headlines. He says, this is riot and rape and economy is going to pieces. And finally, he looks at me and says, don't you realize that you are our hope for freedom? And you're messing it up. And I looked at him and I said, I certainly understand that. Although it wasn't, I didn't understand the impact we had on other countries until then.
Right.
But I said, I know it looks bad, but we will work it through. We'll find a way. Because we are democracy, we will work it through. We'll find a way. And I remember leaving that thinking, I hope I'm right. And that turned out where we were. And the economy boomed. And we didn't fall apart. And we found ways to solve those issues. And I believe that will happen again. Now, I need to go back to the drunken prawns. They came up at the table, this glass bowl. They put a bunch of prawns in who were crawling around. Then they filled a half full of alcohol of some kind. Now the prawns are, this is what they're drinking. And finally, the waiter comes in, pulls the lid, throws in a match. And we have cooked prawns. And so that's what drunken prawns are.
Huh.
And they were actually very good.
Say, were they good? Yeah. They sound good.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, that is very cool. And
I've never seen that in the US, but they had them in Singapore.
yeah, it's one of the perks of traveling around the country, right? You don't know what you don't know, and next thing you know, you're having drunken prawns, and it's fantastic. So it's just along the way, which is great. Before we run out of time, I got a couple more questions I want to ask you. Obviously, you've done so much with like humanitarian work and your own companies, and you've seen a lot during your life, and you've done a lot overseas. I'm just curious. I mean, if you could go back again for younger people listening, if you could go back to being in your early 20s again, I mean, is there anything else that you would do differently, or what's one thing that you would tell yourself in your early 20s? It's a loaded
Well, the
question.
thing I told myself, and the thing I do tell young people, is dream dreams and go after them. And I used to do some leadership training with young teens, and I'd say, okay, I want you on the board up here, I want you to write down your biggest dream. And they would go up and write down something like, well, I want to go to college, or I want to get a car, I want to something. I said, okay, you've all done that. Those aren't your dreams. That's just stuff you've been told you ought to want.
Yeah.
What are your dreams? What do you think about at night you don't want to share with anybody? Well, they'd come a little closer, and I say, okay, you're not there yet. I says, imagine yourself, you have this crazy dream of riding a Harley stark naked across the Sahara. Oh, wow. But that got them saying, oh, this guy's serious. And then they would put up what they really dreamed about, the things that they really thought about. I said, now, those are the things I want you to hold on to. Make that happen. I had a great experience once. This was a graduate school. We had to write this paper about ourselves. And we had to take all kinds of personality tests, intelligence tests, and everything, and talk about what we wanted. And one of the things I did in there is I talked about one of my dreams was to climb Everest.
Wow.
And I went in and talked to the professor. And he looks at it and he says, that's fascinating. And he says, you must do a lot of mountain climbing. I said, no, I don't. He said, well, you must do a lot of stuff outside. I said, no, I don't do that either. And he looked at me and he says, Steve, most people who climb Everest go outside. And I thought about that. And I spent the next summer in Jackson Hole working as a waiter and learning to climb. Now, I never made it to Everest, but
Okay.
I've taught lots of people to climb and
Yeah.
had great experiences. But the key is it was a crazy dream. And and while I never climbed Everest, reading about it, learning to climb got me a lot closer. And I think that's what youth need to do. They need to experiment and listen to their dreams and do things that would get them closer. They may not achieve it or may not achieve it the way they think they will,
Yeah.
but it will bring them joy and experience and get them closer.
Right. Right. And it's all about taking that jump. I think so many people, and I fall in that too in the younger generation, like it's so easy to just play life safe. You know what I mean? It's so
Yeah.
easy to just be complacent, go to college, get that safe job, and you look up 10 years later and you're still there. And you haven't really done what you deep down, like you're talking about what you really wanted to do in your dreams. And they just never take that jump. And like you're talking about, like you gotta be able to dream big, have that dream and just take that risk and just go for it, knowing that you're not gonna have all the answers and you just gotta take that first step. But it's
And the safe job you took has been replaced by AI. So
right, right,
it's not that safe.
right. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you're replaceable. That's the sad thing about it. So it's just, yeah, I mean, hopefully, we break out of that habit and people start taking those jumps and, it'll change their lives. But it's definitely lagging. So it's sad to see. But
So, that's the biggest thing I probably would tell you is dream dreams.
yeah,
Go after them. Don't just throw them away because people might think they're silly, and and take some risk. And just even if it's little risk to start with, and learn from it.
yep.
So I think that not only helps them be successful, it brings a lot of joy in life.
Yeah, I love that. But another topic we always talk about is entrepreneurship. There's so many ups and downs. It's not always going to be one straight line. Even when you look at interviews, look at people that seem to have accomplished so much throughout their life. I mean, they've had ups and downs. So I'm curious. I mean, what were some of those low moments? I mean, did you have any of those low moments like during your entrepreneurship career where you're just like, man, I don't know how I'm going to get to the next day. I don't know how I'm going to make it to the next one. Did you have any moments like that, or too many to count?
I always thought I would never want to invest in somebody who hadn't already had a failure because that's what you learn. Of course, I have. I've had investments that have been disasters. When we were starting the consulting company, a recession hit, and we almost lost it. We managed to, because we've been pretty prudent about our cash, so we managed to pull it through and then turn it into a big success. There are moments in Zimbabwe when I was trying to figure out what to do with AIDS that you just got sick because you had people dying all around you. And you go, what can I do? And I remember the first meeting I went to, the government had guards with Kalashnikovs outside because they didn't want anybody to talk about AIDS. I'm thinking, what am I doing here?
Right.
How am I going to find a way forward? But I guess this is another thing I would teach a young kid is you just keep at it. You just sometimes have to be persistent.
Yeah.
And so, I found myself there writing programs at night, visiting with government people in the daytime, trying to get permissions, and finally found a way through.
Yeah.
And but it's everybody's going to fail somewhere. You are not going to win every game,
Yeah.
but you keep at it.
Right. And eventually you'll find that win, and all it takes is one win. So
That's
just
right.
yeah, love that. Well, I appreciate you sharing all your stories. That was fantastic in your background. Before we jump off, I mean, do you have a number one book recommendation you would have for anyone listening right now, other than
Of
your
mine.
yeah, right, right, right.
uh, I used to read every management book that came out. That was 50 years ago. And so I haven't read a lot of them recently, but there are some of the old ones that are still pretty good. Tom Peters' Toward Excellence is still an excellent book to look at and to learn from. There were some of the old um, kind of psychiatrists who would write kind of business books There's one called Young Man Luther. Another one's called Gandhi's Truth. And they were written from a psychological viewpoint, but what they really showed is what Gandhi and Luther both did is they took their greatest weaknesses and they worked on them and worked on them. And those become their greatest strengths. And so it's great to read some of those old thoughts on persons, people, and what they can do from a psychologist's point of view. And those are both books that helped shape me. Another one that people used to always read is Viktor Frankl's book on, you probably read that one, on the Holocaust, and how people in the middle of the Holocaust could find joy and hope in the middle of all that destruction. And he lived through it and managed to become a worldwide writer and psychologist. So I still turn to some of the old books. Another one that has brought a lot of kind of strength to me, what's the name of it? Can't think of it right now. It was a book written by the lead leader in the 60s, 70s kind of campus revolutions. And he was teaching people not to give up and not to always head things straight on, but to look for ways to make what you're trying to do become part of what they're trying to do. And if you can do, then you both succeed. And so there's some of the old business books that I still find a lot of meaning and comfort from.
Yeah. And what's great about it is that there's so many just great minds you can tap into, just like you're talking about. You just got to go out there, pick up a book and go experience it for yourself and, pick up a few things. And like you mentioned, you never know what you're going to take from it, and you can carry that with you going forward forever. So that's super important.
There was a time way back when that I was traveling all the time. I was put in on 100 or 200,000 miles a year, traveling the world. And whenever I'm about to get on a plane for a 13-hour flight, I would go to the bookstore and just buy 10 books, whatever I could find, usually in paperbacks because they were lighter. And that's what I do is I read those on the plane and just leave them. I didn't necessarily keep them all, but I would pick anything I didn't know anything about. Just, sort of there's subjects from all over the place.
Yeah.
And I think that gives you a greater breadth. So when you talk to other people, you can find ways to relate. You can find better ways to understand. But when we do read, and I'm a reader, is most people tend to read the same thing or something that's just in their area. And we don't break out and read something just goofy from a whole different area of life. And we need to, again, break out more.
Yeah. I love that. Bottom line is be curious, learn new things. And
be curious. Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a great point. Well, with that said, is there anything else you would like to say? And if people want to reach out to you or learn more about you, what is the best way for them to do that? As well as what's the best way for them to, find your book once it comes out?
Well, we're creating that. I think Jeff, who you set this up, who is my son, yep. He has me, I was never on social media very much, but he has his own company, 1DS, putting together a social media presence for me. Nice. And so pretty soon you'll be able to just find it at Steve Mann or at Make a Difference on Instagram and everything else. And we'll put the books will probably come out sometime the 1st of June. Okay. Awesome. And then you'll be able to find it on Amazon. And we'll be putting more and more about it on this Instagram site.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. I'm sure the book's going to be fantastic. Once again, appreciate you hopping on here and, dropping so many just excellent knowledge. And I'm sure our listeners picked up a lot of great things today. So with that being said, Steve Mann, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me. We'll see you.